Okay, we're gonna start a little bit back from you.
Yeah.
Can we talk about free filmmakers when you created
Sure.
it back in the day?
Yeah.
I want to know, what did you have in mind, and do you think that you guys have achieved that like 30 years later now? Has it helped you guys?
Wow. So I went to film school, and I came out of film school, and while I was a student, I started doing stuff for the SABC. Like literally, I was like using the film school equipment, so I came out. I started a company, and very soon I sort of suddenly realized that I felt that the act of making material for the SABC back then was fundamentally compromising me. And so I thought, I'm going to stop this. And I had been working in theatre with Junction Avenue Theatre Company, and there were a group of us that felt similarly about being in South Africa. And
Can you name some of them?
so William Kentridge, Arthur Malepo, Patrick Shai, Ramala Machene, Harriet Gavshon, David Jamy. So it was a bunch of people who wanted to tell stories about South Africa that were truthful. And there wasn't really a means to find finance for that kind of thing in the country. So we got together in order to try and raise money from abroad, and which we did. So I mean, I did a lot of films in that period for British Channel 4 that were about South Africa and about what was happening in South Africa. And there were films that showed everywhere else in the world and weren't shown in South Africa. So that was very frustrating, because it felt like I kind of didn't have a job, because you know, I would do these films and then they would go out into the far distance, and I would never be where they were shown. So that was the pleasure of Yizoyizo. Was the first thing
Explosion.
that I did, or as part of, that was in this country, that people in this country watched. And I didn't care whether people liked it or didn't like it. It was just the fact that they were watching it was like brilliant. So it felt like I'd always been at home, but it felt like I was coming home, you know, because what I was making was now, after more than 10 years, was showing in the country.
Okay. Your love of film, how did it start?
I remember watching 2001: A Space Odyssey when I was about 10 years old. And I have a memory of standing in the middle of the aisle looking at this film and being quite offended by it, because it didn't have a story. Like if you've ever watched the film, it's like, doesn't have a beginning, middle and end like a film is supposed to have. And I was offended, but I was completely captivated. Everything, I remembered every single thing about that film. So that made a big impression. And about 7 years later, it was my first year at Wits. I was studying economics, and 2001: A Space Odyssey was showing in town, in the city center. And I walked there, and it was full. I couldn't get a ticket. And next door there was an Italian film showing by an Italian director called Michelangelo Antonioni, called The Passenger. And I thought, okay, I'll go and see this film. And it was kind of a thriller and a kind of bittersweet love story. And I was 17, and it was like the coolest thing imaginable. And I walked out of that film. I was with other students, and I said to them, to hell with economics, I'm going to make films. Literally, it was there was clarity in that moment, and I thought that I would fail economics that year, which I didn't, and I didn't fail the second year either. So it was like, this is getting disastrous. And in my third year, I dropped out, which enraged. Well, I mean, my parents were suitably unhappy, but so I kind of.
The passenger.
The passenger was the thing that did it.
Yeah.
And
the storyline of Back of the Moon, can you please tell us about it and what inspired it?
Well, my interest in Sophiatown inspired it, and my love for gangster movies, and a certain sentimental streak in me. So it's a combination of all those things. It is a gangster movie and it is a love story. And my fear with it was that the one would cancel out the other, but I think that they live happily together. It was all those interests that came together and inspired the film. And a real interest and quite a deep knowledge about Sophiatown, because I'd done an enormous amount of research around Sophiatown, and I'd done interviews 30 years back with many people who had lived in Sophiatown, so like musicians, journalists.
So you archived it before?
Gangsters. So a lot of what happens in the film is rooted in the interviews that I did in the 80s.
Tell us about Durban International Film Festival and what was the reception like, and your expectations before and after.
Okay, so Durban is my hometown, so it was very nice being at a festival in my hometown. And it seems like the most important festival in South Africa, and I do think of myself as a South African filmmaker, so it was great being there. My experience of the first screening was that I thought the projector was too dark and the sound wasn't right, and so that was my experience of the first screening. But the audience didn't seem to notice that everything looked a bit dim, and they didn't seem to notice that the one side of the stereo was not working. And there was a very warm reception to the film, which was very gratifying, with a few exceptions, with the exception of people that found the violence unpalatable. So that was kind of the response, and it was kind of the response that I expected. It was very gratifying getting an award there as well. I hope it's an indication that broad South Africa will like the film and will go and watch it.
Are you guys planning to tour more film festivals in the future?
I have no idea. It depends on whether it gets invited to film festivals or not. It's not a priority with me. The priority is that it finds...
Busy.
I am busy, and I would like it to find an audience here in this country. That's my priority.
Okay, I believe you have created a positive change in giving unknown actors a spotlight in television and film. What drew you to Monewa and Richard?
I love working with actors, I kind of think that people that are doing something for the first time, or are thrown into the deep end in a way, bring an energy that is fantastic. I mean, you're taking a gamble because sometimes it doesn't work, but when it does work.
But you've done it so well. You've discovered a lot of good talent in this country.
Well, I mean, Yizo was a case in point. I mean, there were many actors there. It was their kind of first time that they were on screen, and they just brought so much to the table. You know, we did a huge amount of improvisation and characters and scenes that were quite slim, suddenly just had a huge life. And that was thanks to what the actors brought.
Very impactful. Papa Action, even till this day, is a good...
Well, Papa Action was supposed to simply be like the silent sidekick on the side of Chester. And Ronnie brought that to the table. Like Gunman, he had like 3 lines. And like he ended up as like, you know, like a real memorable character.
Locations of the film, where was it shot and what was the brief to create a cinematic look?
So we had done this television series called The Road. And for The Road we had built these very beautiful sets, and we had in Crown Mines, we had done this exterior road set using the old buildings that were already there and then adding onto them a little bit. And got to the end of the road and we were going to pull everything down, and suddenly we thought, gosh, this is all so beautiful, got beautiful sets, beautiful costumes, let's do something quickly.
Yeah.
And that's how it happened. And in terms of the aesthetic, you know, the people of Safai Town were great cinephiles. They really knew their movies. And they would watch movies again and again and again. And the movies that they spoke most about were the film noir movies. So the style of the film speaks very much to those films. And color, I originally wanted it to be in black and white, because at the beginning and the end of the film is this very beautiful black and white footage, and I wanted it to be seamless. But there was much debate, and eventually I agreed that we would do it in color. And
thank God.
And
I was like,
yeah.
Hey, I know I want to act, but come on.
So we did it in color, and if you go back to Yizo, the first section of the first season is red. And we returned there, the red of passion and blood, I suppose.
Music plays a big part in the film. What did you and your composer want to achieve for the emotional value?
Okay, so the music, on the one hand, there's a lot of music from the period. So the Manhattan Brothers, Dolly Rutebe, Miriam Makeba, all of that music is very much in the film. You hear it all the time. And the score, I wanted to relate to the kind of film noir movies, the classic film noir kind of score that happened back then in the 40s and 50s. And so that was kind of the brief to Philip, who was the person that has done the score for everything from Yizo through to Isibaya. And he came with this very haunting sound, very simple, but in a classic film tradition. And that was what we chose to go with. I mean, you know, the alternative would have been to go with a jazz score, which would have been great, but we had decided to go down the film noir kind of route.
Transferring the audience from 2019 to 1958 Safai Town, what were the elements you used to create the shift?
Well, we had these, first of all, we had these incredible sets, which, thank you to Dylan Lloyd and Johan Kreiner that made these extraordinary sets with like everything about them. You look at the roof, you look at the walls, the paneling, the doors, everything is completely authentic. And so when you are in there, you feel like you're in that period. It's not like it feels like a bit of cardboard that is trying to be that period. It was for real. And then the exteriors were mainly buildings that were built in the period. So the space around us sort of took us back there. And then, I think wardrobe is a big thing. I can remember on Yizo, in fact, when Papa and Action and Chester were put into wardrobe, it was suddenly like we understood who those characters were. And the same thing here. I kind of think putting on that fantastic 50s clothing,
Yes.
we kind of settled into being in the 50s.
My last question for you is that the South African film industry is used to releasing a lot of rom-coms. Like, where do you think are we losing ourselves creatively? And what, for this movie in particular, Back of the Moon, how do you think you have created a good storyline to entice the audience and still get this revenue that you want?
Well, I've got no problem with rom-coms. I mean, some of my favorite films are rom-coms. But this is, I mean, there's certainly romance in this film. It is a combination of a love story and a gangster movie. And you need if you have an appetite for both those things, I think it delivers both those things. It delivers in both fields, in my view.
You feel like you've brought two genres.
It kind of brings two genres together.